When you go to wash your hair, do you usually shampoo first and then you condition? While this is totally the most common way that people wash their hair, did you know that it might be causing unnecessary damage and breakage, especially if you have fragile, naturally curly hair? I'm going to be sharing some reasons why you should be using a pre-shampoo treatment first, then shampoo, and then condition your hair. And I'm going to share some options such as using an oil, conditioner, or a primer. If you are new to my channel, welcome. My name is Gina, and here I make videos all about naturally curly hair. I love simplifying things, talking about the science of hair, and really helping you problem solve. And if you're a returning viewer, thank you so much for coming back to my channel. So first off, what is a pre-shampoo treatment? Well, this can actually be in several different forms. This is basically a step that you do before you shampoo using a product that will penetrate into the cuticle layer of your hair. You want this to contain some type of penetrating ingredient such as coconut oil. You can also use any conditioner or a primer product, which we will talk about the differences between all of these. So what is the purpose of a pre-shampoo treatment? Well, adding in this step to your routine will help prevent damage during washing and during detangling. And hair that is healthy and not damaged maintains its shine, its moisture levels, its strength, and its protein levels. And it's going to really bounce back a lot better if it's not damaged, and you'll have more curl definition overall. If your hair is damaged, it might also become very dry easily, and it might feel very brittle. So I wanted to share a little bit about the anatomy of hair because it does help to understand this to really get the point of adding in this step and why it's so necessary. So our hair has multiple different layers, but the outermost layer is the hair's cuticle, and this sort of looks like scales or shingles, and it's the outermost protective layer, so it protects the inner workings of our hair. But just from regular wear and tear and going about our life, our cuticle layer does become damaged. So it can be damaged from using brushes on your hair, detangling. Also, major damage can happen from using heat, from bleaching your hair, and even being exposed to the sun. Something as simple as that. A lot of times people will have more damage on the top section of their hair because that's more exposed to the elements. Also, did you know that wet hair is weaker than hair that is dry? But on the other hand, dry hair has less elasticity, which means it stretches less. So that could be a good or a bad thing depending on your curl type and also depending on the amount of moisture and protein in your hair. So there's definitely pros and cons of detangling dry versus wet that we will get into, but adding in some type of product like I'm gonna share here is really crucial during both types of detangling. So going back to the anatomy of our hair, when the cuticle layer becomes damaged, it gets almost like cracks or holes within the cuticle, which then lets out things like critical proteins in our hair that keep the hair strong. Also moisture as well, like your hair will dry out much more if you have a lot of cracks in your hair's cuticle. This also makes it more susceptible to breakage and further damage, such as split ends, during the washing process. Because as I mentioned, when our hair gets wet, it actually swells, which then pushes that cuticle layer out, which can make it even more susceptible to getting damaged because it is in that raised state versus being flat and smooth. So adding in a pre-shampoo treatment, whether if that's in the form of oil, conditioner, or a primer, will coat the strands and coat the cuticle, filling in the gaps in our hair's cuticle, which will then protect it. So we want a product that's going to penetrate into the hair to help fill in those gaps in our hair's cuticle to prevent that moisture and protein from escaping, and also just to protect and lubricate the hair. So let's dive into actually how to use the different types of pre-shampoo treatments, and then we'll talk about who they're best for, who should avoid them, and some mistakes that you might make when you're doing these types of treatments and how to avoid them. So the first way to do a pre-shampoo treatment is using an oil, and I actually like to use oils when I dry detangle. So I have two options to share with you here. This is the Curlsmith fragrance-free shine oil. So this is completely fragrance-free. This is a very lightweight oil that is highly penetrating, which makes it nice, especially if you're in a hurry, because you can put this in right before you jump in the shower, and you only have to let it sit for a few minutes before you shampoo it out, and it does soak into the hair. This does contain coconut as like the second or third ingredient, I think, which is what you want. It's actually a coconut ester, I believe, or a derivative of coconut, which is actually going to help it penetrate even further and be more lightweight. I really recommend using an oil that is formulated to be a hair oil versus going in with straight raw coconut oil, because that can really be hard to shampoo out, and you know that these are going to penetrate much easier because they're made to be used on your hair. Another option is the Ouidad Mongongo oil. I hope I'm saying that oil correctly. This is the multi-use curl treatment. So this says within the description that you can use this before shampoo. Both of these oils, by the way, you can use after you shampoo as well as a finishing oil, so they are multi-purpose, so that way you don't have to purchase multiple products. This also does contain coconut as, I think, the third or the second ingredient, so that's great. We know that coconut is highly penetrating. It can actually soak into the hair and through the hair's cuticle, which is what we want. So both of these are good options. They're very lightweight. They're not going to be hard to shampoo out, and a little goes a long way. Aside from preventing damage in the hair, using a pre-shampoo treatment to detangle is also going to help prevent further tangles and even more breakage to your hair when you're shampooing, and also allow you to really get down to your scalp a lot better. So I prefer to remove the tangles from my hair before I shampoo. That way when I do go in and shampoo, it doesn't get all matted up and nasty when I'm shampooing, because you know how shampoo does that, especially when you are scrubbing your scalp. Plus, shampoo does raise the pH of your hair, which does lift the cuticle a little bit. That's what it's meant to do, to actually cleanse it, and that leads to more of like a rough feeling and not so much of a slippery feeling. So that's why you end up with a lot more tangles, and that's also when your hair is very susceptible to damage when it is in that state, when it's getting cleansed. So that's why getting rid of those tangles first is going to help you tremendously when you're shampooing, and you can really get down to your scalp to get it clean a lot better when those tangles aren't in the way. Now, you're definitely going to get tangles after you shampoo, so you are going to have to go in with more conditioner, but it is so much better, and you're just really dealing with any shed hairs at that point from scrubbing your scalp. So it's a lot easier, and I find it's so much quicker this way than to fully detangle after I have shampooed and I have all those old tangles and all the old shed hair throughout the week in my hair. That's just a recipe for a big nasty mat in your hair. So the next way of doing a pre-shampoo treatment is using any type of conditioner or deep conditioner. So I don't really have one in particular to share with you here, because you can use whatever you have. All of your conditioners are meant to deposit those conditioning ingredients onto your hair and help smooth the cuticle and lower the pH of the hair, which is going to in turn prevent a lot of that cuticle chipping, because it's sort of going to lubricate the hair strand. So you can use your conditioner that you use on wash day. You could even do a deep conditioning treatment if you want. And yes, you are shampooing out that deep conditioner afterwards, but you're still getting the benefits if it is penetrating into your hair strands. You're not completely shampooing it all away. I do still like to deep condition after I shampoo if I am going to be doing a deep conditioning treatment, but some people who have very fine hair that get weighed down easily from deep conditioners, they might find that this method works better anyways to do it before you actually shampoo, so then their hair is not weighed down. So you can definitely use a deep conditioner for this method. So the next method is using an actual primer. So these are products that are designed to be used as a detangler before you actually shampoo, and they can help coat and condition the hair strands. So this one in particular is from TreLuxe, and I wanted to share this with you all because this can be used actually as a leave-in type product as well. So some primers are meant to be used before you style, almost like a leave-in conditioner step. And this one can also be used as a pre-wash treatment. So it's very multi-purpose. So this is the Soothe and Restore Aloe Vera Curl Primer. It says it hydrates, smooths, detangles, and refreshes. So it's very multi-purpose. This is an aloe-based product. Aloe is the second ingredient after water, has glycerin in it, so that's very moisturizing. And then it has hydrogenated castor oil and some other ingredients as well, such as polyquaternium, which is another conditioning ingredient that sort of like coats the hair's cuticle. And so this is a very multi-purpose product, and this one is also the best at detangling, so that's why I wanted to share it for this step. Because if you are going to use a primer step, I feel like it should be one that is good at detangling, because you do want to remove those tangles before you shampoo. So two other options for primers, I have the Curlsmith Super Slip Pre-Biotic Primer. So this is actually part of their scalp recipe. This is meant to be used before their clarifying scrub wash, which is a pretty strong cleanser that does have a scrub in it to help cleanse the scalp and help with dry scalp and product buildup and all that. So this is meant to help protect the hair to prevent it from getting dried out from the shampoos. So that's another benefit of using a pre-shampoo treatment, is it's going to prevent your hair from getting too dried out from from using stripping shampoos like clarifying shampoos and strong lathering shampoos, because we don't want to strip our hair too bad, but we do want to get it clean. So this is an option. It does come in the detox kit, or you can actually buy it separately. The ingredients include water and then glycerin as the second one, and then polyquaternium, which is an ingredient that's going to add a lot of slip and help coat the cuticle. I don't see coconut oil or anything in this, so I don't know how well it helps to actually fill in the gaps in our hair's cuticle, but it definitely does help to just coat the strands with that protective layer of polyquaternium. And then it does have hydrogenated castor oil, which is not going to be heavy like raw castor oil. You don't want to be using those raw oils in your hair. This is going to be more lightweight, and it's from the scalp recipe, so you know that's going to be a lot more lightweight, especially for fine hair. Because this is part of the scalp recipe, it's also going to help protect a dry scalp. So if your scalp gets very tight and uncomfortable feeling when you're using a strong shampoo or a scrub, this is something that can help add a protective barrier to your scalp first, and then you can shampoo. So another option is the Curl Well Curl Snag-Free Pre-Shampoo Detangler. It says that it adds slip, saves time, optimizing shampooing results. De-Frizzes and lubricates the curl surface, while coconut oil helps moisturize and maximize slip to minimize breakage. So it says that it has coconut oil in this, which is excellent. This one is very liquidy. It's very similar to the Curlsmith primer. There's not a huge difference between the two, but it's great that this one does have that coconut oil in it, so we know it is going to help protect the hair. And this one also has polyquaternium actually in the ingredients list before coconut oil. So what do you do when you are short on time? I know some of you are going to think, well, I don't have time to add in an extra step. There's always so many steps with curly hair, and I totally get it. But if you are someone who is really struggling with damage and you want to grow out your hair and your hair just never seems to grow, or you have very damaged hair, you definitely do need to add in this step if you do want to have healthier hair. Like, curly hair is just more maintenance. It is what it is, and we can simplify it as much as possible. So anyways, to make it a lot quicker, what you can do is just add in some oil to your hair or to your ends, and you don't have to fool with detangling and sectioning and all that if you absolutely don't want to and don't have the time to detangle. I mean, you're gonna have to detangle at some point afterwards anyways. And usually when I detangle first, then shampoo and conditioner, and detangle after conditioner, it's not gonna take me as long. Like, it's the same amount of detangling regardless, is what I'm saying. So the only extra step here is just applying that oil to your hair. So if you just wanna do that really quickly by just applying oil real quick to your hair, do that the night before or do it before you hop in the shower. I recommend using an oil like the Curlsmith one that you know is going to soak in really quickly. I find that I do this a lot of times last minute right before I get in the shower, and I've never had an issue with it being hard to shampoo out. But use an oil like this that's gonna soak in quickly. At least you're getting the benefits to protect from breakage, even if you're not going to detangle when you're putting the oil in. Another quick method is to just use your conditioner before you shampoo, as I mentioned. So you could just apply that real quick to your hair, go ahead and detangle, and then shampoo, and then go in real quickly afterwards with another light layer of conditioner, because you do still need to be conditioning your hair after you shampoo. You don't want to skip that. So that step can be very quick as well, even if you don't want to fully detangle beforehand. I also wanted to mention that when it comes to time, detangling your hair faster with a brush is not always better. If you can get through the tangles super quickly, that doesn't mean that it was better at detangling. It means you were just breaking your hair. So especially when you're using a brush, when you're just kind of going through the knots really quickly, you're just ripping the hair to rip through the knots. Like, the brush isn't helping to separate and pull apart the knots like it is with your fingers. It's just ripping through them. Especially if you're doing it really quickly, you always get so much more breakage. So faster detangling, not always healthier. You do want to kind of take your time when it comes to detangling if you're really trying to prevent breakage. And when you're detangling, when your hair is dry and using your fingers, you are definitely going to notice breakage a lot more. You can hear it, you can feel it. When your hair is dry, so much more opposed to when it's wet. You're not even probably going to notice it when your hair is wet, especially if you have very fine hair. And a lot of times when I am dry detangling with my fingers, I'm just sort of pulling apart the knots versus like pulling through them. Like with a brush, you've got the teeth that just sort of rip through them. When you're using your fingers, you're like separating them, you're removing those loose hairs, which often are what's causing the tangles. So it's so much better for your hair to slowly detangle dry if you can. So who should use a pre-shampoo treatment? Like, who should actually make the time for it, and who is it most critical for? So definitely for anyone who has damage in their hair. So damage can be from heat, if you're still straightening every once in a while. bleach. So if you get highlights in your hair, if you dye your hair, very fine hair is also more likely to break off because it doesn't have that strength. But on the other hand, very coarse hair can often be more brittle, especially if it has those kinks in it. I have a lot of coarse hairs in certain areas of my hair, and they tangle up pretty bad too because they're not smooth. So the hair strands don't glide together next to each other. They just get tangled up. Also, people who are swimmers, so if you're going to get in the pool, if you're someone who does swim every day, that's when you definitely need to be applying some type of coconut-based oil to your hair to help protect it from absorbing too much of that chlorine in pool water. And anytime you're going to be using a clarifying shampoo, as I mentioned, or a scalp scrub, anything like that, that is a little bit more harsh on the hair, definitely be using these treatments first. So now, who does not necessarily need to use a pre-shampoo treatment? So people who have super healthy hair. If they have virgin hair, they've never colored it, they've never dyed it, their hair is completely healthy, maybe they don't even use a diffuser, those people probably don't need to. However, you do still want to protect your hair from future breakage, and it's still exposed to regular elements outside. So I still recommend it, but I guess you could skip it if you do have super healthy hair. And along with that, if you have very low porosity hair, so if your cuticle is very tightly bound and it gets buildup on it easily and you really struggle to get products to penetrate, you might not even need this because when you do shampoo, you probably aren't experiencing as much of that like cuticle lifting and that damage and stuff. So perhaps if you have low porosity hair, you might not need this, but as I mentioned, I still think everyone can benefit at least from a little bit of oil before they shampoo. And I also wanted to share maybe who should not detangle dry. So as I mentioned in the beginning, there can be some downsides to dry detangling. So people who have a very tight curl pattern probably cannot easily dry detangle even with oil. I have heard people say that before. I mean, you might be able to kind of work through knots with your hands, but it might be harder because of that tight curl pattern. It's going to be harder to get through those knots, and when your hair gets wet, it loosens up. So I totally understand how people with tighter curl patterns than me, like your type 4 hair, are probably going to have a harder time at dry detangling. So those people probably should opt for the conditioner method or any of these primers that are used on wet hair. And along with that, people who have very low elasticity, or maybe their hair is really lacking moisture. So elasticity is basically how much your hair can stretch before it breaks. And you do want to have that sweet spot of, you want some stretch so that way your hair doesn't snap immediately, but you also don't want too much stretch to where your hair doesn't have any bounce back. So usually people who are lacking moisture and have very dry hair, it just snaps very quickly. And so if you're dry detangling where dry hair already has less elasticity, it can then lead to breakage. So that's when you definitely need to be using a good oil or use the conditioner or primer method on wet hair, and you need to deep condition and fix the dryness to improve your elasticity. Another one I wanted to mention is if you have a very, very strong hold gel in your hair, or if you use a ton of hairspray, maybe you just did a hairstyle, then you probably don't want to dry detangle because it's gonna be very hard to get through that gel. I've definitely had that happen before. Same with hairspray, like that causes a very hard feeling. It's gonna be hard to dry detangle. So in those cases, use the conditioner or the primer method, because then you can kind of rinse out that stronghold gel or that hairspray and then be able to get through the tangles a lot better. So last but not least, let's talk about some mistakes that you might make when you're using a pre-shampoo treatment. So if it didn't work out for you, it could be from one of these common mistakes. And the first one is using too much oil. This is probably the most common mistake. People would go in with a ton of oil. Like, you shouldn't really see your hair being like drenched in oil. So somewhere in between where it looks very shiny, you can see the oil, but it's not drenched, if that makes sense. Because then it's gonna be so much harder to shampoo that out. You might notice that your shampoo's not lathering, or it still feels greasy after you shampooed once or twice. That's when you use too much. This can also happen if you use a raw oil, such as pure coconut oil or castor oil, those really thick oils, like straight from the jar, like that you might use to cook with. That's not really a good option because those are a lot heavier and then they solidify at room temperature too, or at least coconut oil does, and that can make the hair feel hard and brittle. So it's just not a good option. I mean, if you absolutely have nothing else, you could use a little bit of coconut oil, but use it very sparingly and don't coat your hair in this. I definitely have made that mistake before, and it was a nightmare to shampoo out, and then I just got even more tangles and even more breakage. So hair oils are formulated hair serums, so they have less of that ingredient, and they're also formulated to be smaller in molecular size so they can actually penetrate and not just feel stiff and build up on the hair. So they still have coconut, but it's just not pure coconut oil. Another huge mistake is using coconut oil as a leave-in. This is definitely a no-no and not something that you want to leave in your hair. You definitely want to shampoo it out afterwards. Same with castor oil. Coconut oil, as I mentioned, will solidify and make your hair feel brittle and hard. So don't ever apply coconut oil and then just leave it in your hair. You definitely want to be shampooing it out. Another one is not applying it evenly. So if you just kind of dumped it on the top of your head, or if you only got it on the surface layer and didn't fully comb it through, then you might have a hard time shampooing it out because it's all concentrated in one area. So ideally you want to apply it in sections if you have time. Another mistake is not washing it out effectively. You would be surprised at how people are not thoroughly shampooing because you don't really pay attention. Like, you think shampooing is just easy, like anyone can put in shampoo and wash their hair, but you really have to be thinking about how thoroughly you're getting your scalp clean. And you might be surprised that there's like some areas on the underside layer that aren't even really getting shampoo. And I notice this when I film my wash days because I see that I'm not thoroughly cleansing. I noticed that maybe I didn't even get the bottom section. I was only putting the shampoo up here and then letting it run down. And I wasn't even getting shampoo like underneath my neck in that area, so that area is not even getting cleansed. So really pay attention to getting the shampoo on all areas of your hair and really scrubbing your scalp so you make sure you're thoroughly cleansing that out so that way you don't end up with like a greasy spot after you wash your hair. Another reason why pre-shampoo oiling might not work well for you is if you're using a co-wash. Co-washes just are not strong enough to shampoo out most oils. If you do want to use the co-wash, use a very lightweight thin oil and make sure you let it soak in. I would probably definitely do this overnight so that way you know it's fully soaked in, because if you go in with a bunch of oil right before you use the co-wash is not going to be able to get rid of that oil. Another big mistake is dry detangling without oil. You definitely don't want to do this. If you are going to dry detangle, you need something with slip, or else it's just going to cause breakage, as I mentioned, because there's not a ton of elasticity when your hair is dry. And the last big mistake is using a brush. I know it can be so tempting to pick up a brush because you think that it's faster and easier, but it's just snapping your hair and you can't even tell because you can't feel it when you're using a brush. So definitely don't do that. Use your fingers. Take your time to separate the tangles if possible, and don't rip through them with a brush because you're going to end up with so much more breakage. The only time I'll use a brush is if I have a ton of conditioner in my hair and I just want to make sure that I'm evenly distributing the conditioner, but at that point the tangle's already gone and I'm just using it to distribute product. I'm not using the brush to detangle. So I'm gonna link you to all these products that I recommended in the description box down below. And if you have any recommendations for a good drugstore pre-shampoo oil, please let me know in the comments. And if you're someone that has damaged hair, or maybe your curls are looking very limp and they're just not holding their shape, then I recommend watching the video that I will link right here on the screen. It's all about protein treatments and bond repair treatments, and I compare the two. So we get very much into the hair science. We talk about the differences between these two ingredients and who should use each one based on your hair type. So I have that video linked right here on the screen, and I will talk to you over there. Bye everyone.